On today's show, a special edition as I am joined by Yahoo Sports national NBA reporter Jake Fischer, talk about all the latest when it comes to the Atlanta Hawks and the trade winds that are blowing in between the draft and free agency. All of that and more on the way.
You are Locked On Hawks, your daily Atlanta Hawks podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello, friends. Welcome to episode 1505 of the Locked On Hawks podcast. I am your host, Brad Rowland, coming to you on a Friday afternoon, the day after the 2023 NBA draft. And if you missed it, we did a full deep dive into what the Hawks did on Thursday and what they didn't do with regard to the roster, but with Kobe Lufkin, with Mohamed Gay, with regard to Seth Lundy, and all of the stuff around the draft. I talked about that on Thursday evening, very, very late into the night. So if you missed that podcast, I recommend checking out that show right now. Also making it your first listen each and every day here at Locked On Hawks. Please subscribe anywhere you get your podcasts, places like Apple and Spotify, YouTube, etc. Also, we did all kinds of wall-to-wall coverage about the draft and the salary cap and the Hawks roster, a full series with Glenn Willis of Feature Hoops and ATL 129 talking about the entire roster. It's still very relevant right now with regard to the player capsules from the top of the roster with Dejounte Murray and Clint Capela, John Collins, DeAndre Hunter, to the young guys like AJ Griffin, Jalen Johnson, Sadiq Bey, etc. All of that is available for you right now in this podcast feed. And as I mentioned before on the teaser, today I'll be joined by Jake Fischer of Yahoo. Jake and I are friendly, dating back for quite some time now, but he has risen very quickly and sort of to the very, very top of the industry, one of the leading newsbreakers and reporters in the entire NBA space. He covers the league for Yahoo, also has podcast stuff, all that stuff we'll talk about later, I'm sure. But Jake has been all over the place with regard to reporting stuff on the Hawks, sort of emptying out his notebook in the lead up to the draft. Also had a sort of morning after column on Friday that we'll talk about as well. So I say all that. This is a very valuable sort of special guest appearance. I was not planning to do another show until Sunday or Monday, but when Jake is available, I definitely wanted to get this show out there for everybody going into the weekend. And we'll have much more in the future. I'll have my stuff on Summer League scheduling and some luxury tax stuff that kind of popped up a little bit today. The Hawks made some transactions that were reported on Exhibit 10 contracts, two-way contracts. We'll save all of that for later. But for now, myself and Jake Fischer talking about the entire trade landscape for the Hawks, what's going on, what you can believe, what sort of uncertain at this point, and all that fun stuff. Here is Jake Fischer. I'm joined by a friend of mine and also a very prominent voice in NBA reporting these days. Jake Fischer of Yahoo is here. Hello, Jake. What's going on?
What's up, man? How you doing?
I'm well. I appreciate you doing this the day after the draft.
Yeah.
I guess I'll ask you this. This is more of a you question, but what's crazier for you, the lead up to the draft or the lead up to free agency in your job?
I guess crazier, I'll say draft because the free agency stuff is starting to come in.
It's still in there, yeah.
I mean, a lot of this stuff can't be talked about right now and is not being talked about for sure. There's definitely not conversations happening between teams and free agents. That's not a thing. But I think also a lot of the moves that are happening in the draft are setting the stage for free agency and vice versa. So, this is definitely jumping the gun and complete conjecture. I'm just putting together the things that would make sense. I'm throwing out there. It's certainly possible John Collins ends up departing the Hawks by way of a sign and trade somewhere, just like any, veteran player. So all those things are already starting to take shape during the draft, and trades that can happen now / into free agency. A lot of them were just talked about during the draft. So there's a lot of noise in both directions, but the draft compared to free agency and the trade deadline is always my favorite. And it's, I'd say, probably where I become a little more active on Twitter. I don't like to tweet too often. It's because there's and I say this all the time, there's an order. It's kind of through the analogy of a quiz mechanism when you're in middle school. The trade deadline is kind of column A and column B and column C, where A are players, or A are players, and then B is positions, and C is the teams. And you kind of have to draw the line to all of them. But not every piece on the board is going to have a line drawn. Sometimes guys not dealt, or sometimes the team was looking for I remember Tyreek Evans years ago. The Grizzlies were shopping him all around, and they were looking for a first-round pick and never got a first-round pick. Had multiple second-round picks on the table, turned them down, and then Tyreek left in free agency for nothing.
Yep.
But like they just didn't get what they wanted, like that type of stuff. Just it's harder to understand compared to when the draft. There's going to be an order 1 through 60. This year is 58, and everyone in the NBA ecosystem, from people at the union who are just keeping tabs on things because that's their job, league office people, same thing, agents who are very, very invested in their players going to particular cities and organizations and numbers because of the affiliated price range of the rookie scale contracts, to teams who are trying to figure out what's happening above them. So it's kind of fun draft night to, start thinking about, all right, the Atlanta Hawks are 15th and it's the 10th pick now. So they've had conversations with Dallas. I know Atlanta's also trying to figure out what's happening at 11, 12, 13, 14. So maybe we can work together to start figuring that out. And by the time they're on the clock, maybe I can know what's happening there. That's kind of, I think, the most fun part of my job. My girlfriend was sitting next to me on the couch, and like we're texting and figuring out what's going on. And then the couple of times where you do get something out before it happened on the broadcast, she was kind of getting a kick out of it. It can be kind of thrilling to like piece together what this puzzle is in real time that the whole league has been trying to piece together for a month now in earnest since the combine. Other people have been thinking about it for longer, but like the combine really starts this thing. I mean, at that point in time, there's only 4 teams left in the playoffs. 26 teams are trying to figure out the draft, and then draft night, it all comes together. So that's my long rambling answer to your question that I hope made sense.
It did for sure. And yeah, I mean, and you throw in, you mentioned it, but like just trying to figure out, like, I love the draft for prospects. Like I that's not, it's not your beat anymore. I know that, like, you're not diving into like second round film or anything like that, but I love that part of it too.
Yeah.
It's a wild night. I mean, you mentioned the Hawks there. Obviously, we'll talk about some stuff that you've talked about already or whatever, but so overall, I got some responses. I'm sure you're not surprised. People were surprised they didn't do anything last night as far as the roster is concerned. I don't think it was like shocking. Maybe you disagree that like they didn't make a move now, but it's more surprising if they don't make a move the next 2 weeks. Kind of what I've been saying. Like you don't have to do your business on draft night, but you've been plugged in. I mean, you've been reporting stuff. Your notebook's been very full on the Hawks stuff. Like, generally speaking, we can dive into players too, but like, what do you think? Like, what are they trying to do? Like, is it cost cutting? Is it just retooling? Like, what's the feeling out there about what the Hawks are even trying to do right now? Today's show is brought to you by Birddogs. Birddogs is fantastic, bringing comfort, fit, and versatility to the table with their products. I feel great and comfortable in my own skin when wearing Birddogs gear, and Birddogs stretch khaki shorts are designed to fit slimmer through the thigh and leg to give you that soft look that you're looking for this summer. They fit much better than regular shorts. They happen to be made of that stiff, restricting cotton that you may not enjoy. Birddogs also fixes that issue by inventing their cloud knit fabric that looks just like khaki, but also happens to stretch, giving you that slimmer fit without actually having to sacrifice anything with regard to your movements. They also use that anti-sweat wicking fabric to keep you cool and dry all day long. And in the end, Birddogs makes amazing products across the board, and you're going to want to check them all out now by going to birddogs.com/lockedonnba. When you get there, use that promo code. It is lockedonnba. When you do use that code, it is actually going to net you a free custom Birddogs Yeti-style tumbler with each and every order. One more time, check out birddogs.com/lockedonnba.
I've written a lot about the Hawks because the Hawks are definitely very active on the phones. And when you're talking to Indiana and to Dallas and to Utah and to Toronto and to, keep going on the list, it gets around and I start hearing about it and I start asking about it. So yeah, I was surprised that something didn't necessarily go down, but also like I kept saying it too, and it sounded like a hedge at the time, but there's so many of these trade situations, whether it was, the Lakers liking to potentially move up from 17, Brooklyn at 21, 22, Utah at the 28th pick was a pick that everyone I was talking to around the league in the late afternoon was looking at potential trade scenarios that I think even maybe Atlanta was involved in at a certain point in time. Like a lot of that stuff, especially this draft, more than any draft I've ever covered. This is my 10th draft. There was just so much maneuverability in both directions than I've seen as a real possibility. Like, sure, every team calls every team ahead of them and says, what would it take to get up? And then they call teams behind them and say, what are you looking, how high are you looking to move up? What would you be willing to do? That type of stuff, just to get all their cards and see what options they can have depending on who's available. But this year, there just seemed to be such an uncertainty. Jett Howard was not expected to go, 11th, for example. He definitely was a late teens type of guy. And I'm not saying the Magic reached, and what a terrible pick for the Magic. I don't know anything about these players. I haven't watched these guys. I like Anthony Black because I watched 10 minutes of his YouTube highlights just to get a sense of how he plays and moves and whatever. But I don't know what I'm talking about. So I said that to say I'm not necessarily surprised that Atlanta didn't get a deal done because, one of their trade up opportunities seemed to be really strong with Dallas, and the Mavericks ended up using it not to gain something, but to get off of Davis Bertans' deal with OKC. And that's to lead this back to Atlanta and what I think they're trying to accomplish here. When we saw it with Dallas with Bertans, and the Kings kind of did the same thing with Dallas sending. The Kings basically traded the 24th pick to the Mavericks for minimum considerations. I don't even know what the return is back to Sacramento. I think it's next to nothing. If there's a little bit more out there, I apologize. But from my understanding, in the middle of all the madness, as I'm talking to you now, super exhausted after 5 hours of sleep for 4 straight nights. I don't think the Mavericks sent anything of big strong value back to Sac. So there was word they were looking to move that pick and get off of it for their own salary accounting too. Domantas Sabonis has a lot of money potentially upcoming here. So the Kings used a legitimate first pick to get off of Rashawn Holmes' contract right after Dallas moves Davis Bertans to OKC. The biggest cap move of the night was Golden State, this new CBA with the second tax apron that's supposed to target teams like Golden State. Golden State, the big bad, the checkbook victory that everyone was complaining about last year. They're moving Jordan Poole and his 4-year, 128 something like that $1 million contract to the Wizards to get back Chris Paul at his $30 million salary, which, I was very doubtful. A lot of cap people I knew around the league were very doubtful that a contending team would be willing to pay Chris Paul $30 million this year. But for the Warriors, they were already going to pay that to Jordan Poole. And next year, Chris Paul's salary for 2025 is entirely non-guaranteed. So you can wipe your hands clean of that, save some money. I don't know what that'll end up being. Will they become a cap space player and all that stuff, because we got Clay being extension eligible right now. Draymond opted out. There's a lot still left to be determined of Golden State's offseason, that's for sure. So, and to bring it back to Atlanta, they're not the only team in this situation. People around the league are looking at Tyler Hero. I don't know for certain if there'll be anything there, but Jordan Poole just signed basically an identical contract to him, and Golden State moved him for Chris Paul before that contract even began to save themselves long term. So will Miami and their star huntingness, obviously he would probably be their centerpiece for an offer for Dame Lillard. But even regardless of that, I think we'll hear Tyler Hero's name come up, at least conceptually. So with Atlanta, when you have John Collins with, I don't know the numbers off the top of my head, but I think it's still 2 years left, right? At $25 million. Is it three? Three?
Well, third year as a player option, which he might opt into, obviously. So
yeah. So 2 guaranteed years left. DeAndre Hunter, I believe also this year starts his 4-year. So those are the 2 names I'm really looking out for. A lot of teams have called on Clint Capela for sure. I know definitively from both sides of the Dallas-Atlanta talks that in that Collins 15-10 stuff that was originally pitched, the Mavericks wanted Clint Capela in there. I think there might have also been, I don't have it rocks off the top of my head, but I can't imagine they didn't talk about DeAndre Hunter, and I believe they did in certain aspects too. But yeah, there was talks with Hunter with Indiana that on Tuesday night. I remember I play pickup every Tuesday at 6:30 at this high school in Lincoln Center area, Manhattan, and it's in the second floor basement of the school. It's a very nice court, but there's not a lot of good phone service down there. And I didn't give a shit though. I just needed my pickup reprieve. I was if something happens while I'm playing, it's fine. It's meant to be. But I got a text from someone saying like, yo, there's something close with Atlanta and Indiana. And then the word was getting around about Hunter, and I don't know specifics, but I think Atlanta ended up being the ones to, or no, Indiana ended up being the ones to back out, from my understanding. But it doesn't really matter who backed out at this point. Like,
yeah, it's like interesting
yeah,
fodder to when it happens, but
yeah,
because people always want to know. I'm sure, like you write something like how close was it? It doesn't really. I mean, and Indiana
yeah,
moved on. Obviously, they've done other things now, and they've done a lot of.
yeah,
They've been really active.
yeah.
So
Like, I'm pretty sure that 29th pick that they sent to Denver was involved in the Hunter stuff. And like after those talks fell apart, Indiana was like, we're moving on. Like, this thing didn't happen. I don't know how, if there was like contentious or I don't know about that, but
well, and that's how I want to ask you actually, because like you're in this stuff, like fans, of course, they see something was close, or it's frustrating to a fan that like wants something to happen. They just want transactions, but
yeah,
like you can speak to it. This stuff happens. Even the stuff that gets reported, it's just a fraction, I assume, of like the stuff that is kind of close that happens. Then just for whatever reason, it breaks off, and
yeah,
doesn't mean the door's closed forever. But like, especially if you're like everything you just said about the Hawks, they have these 3 or 4 guys that all make real money, and like it's like a lot of moving parts, especially if they're kind of more actively looking to cut salary, which has been reported, I think, and I've heard the same thing. Like they kind of want to cut salary, and Collins is the one that's hilarious. Like we all know,
yeah,
it's been 3.5 years of this, but I mean, does that sound right to you? Like how it's very frequent. I think more than fans
yeah,
recognize that, like how many deals get close and just fall apart for no
yeah,
reason at all. Just whatever.
yeah. I mean, a lot of the stuff that, especially like frameworks, like, oh, they talked about this player and that I end up getting, and I try to phrase it always like usually something that is either getting like bookmarked for later, or they reached an impasse and they're done, because that's how they get out. Like, oh, like this happened, and we're not going to do it. But a lot of those things still, like, there was definitely still talks between Dallas and Atlanta as the draft continued. I mean, that's just you make the, like, I remember in the Grantland, what do they call it? God, the thing with the Kings, the draft 3.0. What was the special called? Whatever it was, where it was Pete D'Alessandro's front
Oh,
office.
yeah, I remember that now.
I remember that clip where there's a clip of there's a clip of him calling Philadelphia at 3 to try to see if they can get Joel Embiid, and he says something like, "Yeah, I know that you don't want to trade it, but we're just trying one last time." You know what I mean? Like that type of stuff. I mean, these are just
Yeah.
these are guys just like you and me, guys and gals, just like all of us.
They're just having talks. Yeah.
Yeah. So,
That is interesting.
yeah, but to the last thing about like why this one fell apart, I think generally, for a sense I've gotten from, I'll say 2 things. One, I don't think Atlanta is like, cost cutting to like an egregious degree where like fans, because I know there's now this culture in the NBA Twitterverse where like the second a team or a fan base hears about like a team saving money, it's like, man, our owner's cheap. Like, why do we spend our hard-earned money to pay for season tickets? And they this billionaire can't, blah blah blah. And this could sound like propaganda, but a lot of the stuff also, like, a lot of teams are trying to save money to be able to spend it later. Like, if you get into the tax now and keep being in the tax, like, especially on this new situation, your damages are going to become more and more punitive. So I think a lot of the time, cost saving stuff that gets misconstrued by the fans is like cheapness from an owner. Like, maybe, I mean, that does happen for sure, but
Yeah.
I think, like, for Atlanta's perspective, Dejounte Murray's name has definitely come up in trade talks this year, but like, they gave up 3 first-round picks for him last year. They're not just going to let him walk for nothing, and he's up for a very lucrative extension. You got Onyeka Okongwu, who's up for a very lucrative extension. Sadiq Bey, who the whole league knew wanted around $20-25 million before he got traded to Atlanta. The Hawks gave up 5 second-round picks, which isn't like, the whole war chest, but that's not nothing. Like, they clearly are prepared to pay him, excuse me, more money. Like, I think a lot of the cost-saving moves that teams do now is also with the idea of spending later. So, I forget what my second point was going to be, but
No,
I'll just end
it's all good. I think people are gonna love to hear that you say that, because I occasionally poke and prod Tony Wrestler for cutting the tax. So I think people are gonna like hear the other side of that on the podcast. Today's show is brought to you by Gametime. If you've been trying to take tickets to a big event at the last minute, it can really be stressful. Not the best idea, possibly for your mental state or your wallet even. After all, my tickets should not be a hassle. It's actually the fun of it that's part of the appeal with Gametime. Gametime is the fastest, easiest way to buy tickets for sports, music, comedy, and theater. You can avoid all the stress and getting hyped for the fun instead that you're going to have because Gametime has killer deals and the best price guarantee. With Gametime, it's also easy to find the best deals. Plus, you can actually see where the images are going to be of the seats that you'll actually have, and they have protection if your event happens to be canceled. Forget all the months of planning in advance. There are tickets and deals on those tickets right up to the day of the event with Gametime. And a Gametime guarantee also means you have the best possible price. If you buy tickets in the same section, in the same row for less, you'll be credited 110% of the difference with Gametime. It's the fastest growing ticketing app in the country for a reason. You can buy tickets just a matter of seconds. Plus, they'll be sent directly to your phone to make things easy for you. Download the Gametime app right now. Create an account. Use the promo code LOCKEDONNBA. When you get there for $20 off your first purchase, terms apply. Again, create an account with the Gametime app. Redeem the promo code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off. Download the Gametime app today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Today's show is brought to you by PrizePicks. If you enjoy the DFS space, make sure you check out the award-winning app at PrizePicks. PrizePicks is daily fantasy made easy. It's amazing. I know that you will love it as well. It's very easy to use. I've been playing PrizePicks for a couple of years now. It's really a breeze and a lot of fun to dive into all of what they offer on the app. All you have to choose actually choose 2-6 players and actually choose whether to actually have more or less than a certain number of points or rebounds or assists. Other stats, other sports, of course, like yards in football, etc. And at PrizePicks, you win up to 25 times the amount of money on your entry. They offer numbers on all kinds of sports. That includes, of course, basketball in the NBA space, WNBA, college basketball, etc. Also the NFL, college football, MLB, NHL, PGA, they have soccer, esports, and much more. And a whole entry can be done in just a minute or less. It's that easy and it's that quick. Plus, it's just you against the numbers. It's very simple. PrizePicks has safe and fast withdrawals as well. They're operating in more than 30 states now, plus Canada. Download the app right now with PrizePicks. Go to PrizePicks.com to sign up and play daily fantasy sports. And when you get there, if you're a first-time user, get a 100% instant deposit match up to $100 with promo code LOCKEDON. Don't forget that promo code. It is locked on at sign up for the instant deposit match up to $100. Check it out now at PrizePicks. You mentioned Murray. I was going to ask you about Murray because, the other three guys who I will ask you about too: Collins, Hunter, Capela. Murray's in kind of a different category. Obviously, you've reported, I think, multiple times now that the whole roster is available other than Trey, essentially, which would include Dejounte.
The Hawks have told me that.
Yeah, so that's not a surprise. I kind of said the same thing, and I mean, you're more plugged in than I am, but Dejounte is a weird one. Like you mentioned a second ago, they traded a lot for him. He's their second best player. What do you know what the feeling is there? Not that they're definitely not shopping him. I know you've reported that, but what kind of calls are they what's even the market? It's kind of a weird situation because he is hitting free agency next year and he's making this kind of small salary now. There's a lot of moving parts there.
I don't have admittedly as much insight into this part as I'd like. I mean, from his representation side of things, it seems like they would want to be involved in steering him to the next situation. So that undoubtedly plays a factor and slows the process. Same thing with Pascal Siakam, who's been a target for Atlanta, right? When you're extension eligible, you do have some type of agency as an agent, as a player, to try to help maneuver your way. I mean, that's what Dejounte did to get to Atlanta. He didn't just call a shot and say, I want to go to the Hawks, and it happened. But him wanting to be in Atlanta and trying to get to a team early that would, in theory, be wanting to pay the next contract next summer that he couldn't have gotten earlier under the old CBA. We'll see if this new 140% thing encourages players like him and OG Anunoby. Excuse me. Wow. That was weird. Wow. Sorry about that.
You've been talking a lot the last few days.
Yeah.
I understand.
We'll see if that ends up influencing those guys and other guys in their situation. Both those guys are both represented by Rich Paul. We'll see if that changes things about them being more willing to sign now as opposed to having to wait to get probably fair price points next year. But I think trading Dejounte has a lot more hurdles to climb than, sure, with DeAndre and with John Collins, their people are going to be involved and have been involved too. But I think with Dejounte's situation, the fact that he's got that extension thing looming and he is an all-star. That's a big differentiator between those other two players. There'll probably be a little bit more of that like added power player-ness that comes into these types of things.
Yeah, I mean, and Rich Paul's got a lot of juice too, as everybody knows, I think, at this point. So I'll start with Hunter. I've said this before. I have a hard time figuring out how the Hawks value Hunter right now because Travis Schlenk was the one that drafted him and paid him, and he's not there anymore. It's a new front office, all that stuff. Like, what's your sense about like what the Hawks feel about Hunter, but also what's the league think about DeAndre Hunter? Because he's kind of a guy that I get a lot of mixed reactions on. So I wonder what you've heard about any of that.
I mean, especially in this new climate with the CBA that we've been kind of hovering around all conversation. Guys who have long-term money at big numbers that have injury histories are just not in vogue right now. Bradley Beal's value, I think, was massively hampered by the no trade clause, but also the fact that he hasn't been incredibly available throughout his career. His situation is very interesting, being that at the beginning of his career, he had this whole reputation of, I don't have the numbers in front of me, but I think he was like under or around 50 games played in the first of his 3 seasons, and then like made it a mission to play all 82. And then like the last couple of years, as the Wizards have definitely faded from playoff contention, it's gone in concert with his lack of availability on the court. So with DeAndre, like his value was at all-time high, I'd say, in the playoffs when they made that run to the Eastern Conference Finals, because if I remember correctly, he was playing really well and then he got hurt, right? And then his absence was glaring.
Yeah, he's been. I mean, it's not that he's been banged up all the time, but he's had some ill-timed absences. Like when he was his second season was probably when he was playing his best, and he got hurt like right after he had his best stretch of his career. So it's
when he was like showing playmaking stuff, and people were kind of saying, "Oh, like maybe this guy could be a legit number 3, maybe even like a number 2 on a championship team." Like kind of the role Andrew Wiggins played for the Warriors as kind of like a small ball 4 type thing. And I think that's where the league does see him now, as a small ball 4. He's not playing down a position in a lot of these teams' eyes. Like the Pacers were definitely looking at him for that power forward slot. I mean, Detroit, who the hell knows where they view him as, because they have all these bigs. But I would think the fact that they have all these bigs, they would maybe try him on the wing a little bit. But yeah, in terms of like trade asset valuation stuff now, I don't have a clear sense, but I mean, the Pacers were like, we're not putting the 7th pick on the table for DeAndre Hunter. Like that wasn't something that was being considered, and they definitely were with Golden State for Jonathan Kuminga. So that's at least one comparable. And Kuminga is a lot younger and does not have a massive contract yet. So very different situations, but that's at least a benchmark to provide for you.
Yeah, and not to always compare them together, but with Collins, I think we all kind of know the deal. It's a big contract. It's not like completely ridiculous, but it's a lot of money for him. He's been squeezed. He's been squeezed in Atlanta, and I think a lot of the perception is like Hunter's more attractive because he's actually not younger. They're the same age, but he's kind of seen as that. He's not quite as entrenched as Collins, all that stuff. But like, not to ask the question everybody always asks you, but what's happening with John Collins? Is it the same thing that we've been talking about for 3 years now, or has anything changed? Like, what's the urgency level? Like, I don't know. I don't even know how to frame it. You know what I'm saying. It's all the same.
If he's listening, there's someone at XL Sports who does not love how often I talk about John Collins, but in this scenario, I'm being asked about it. So
I asked Jake this question on this podcast. Yeah. And I like John a lot. Everybody knows this to listen to this podcast. I am definitely higher on John than most people are. So there's
I like John a lot too. I'm a big fan of John. I think the word squeezed, you said, has been accurate, and I think he's kind of like undervalued right now in the league, to the point where like I'm kind of surprised how Dallas didn't jump on that opportunity to acquire him where they did. I mean, they clearly wanted Derek Lively, and he wasn't getting past New Orleans at 14, to my knowledge. So, I mean, it would have depended on things, but I think the way the draft went, that Grady Dick went 13. I don't think Lively would have gotten past New Orleans at 14. But regardless, to me, just like the concept of moving down 5 slots to get off Bertans' money, which Collins has more money on the books, but to me, getting a fresh start away from what's been, constant trade rumors that, yes, I have definitely been guilty of helping perpetuate. So
but they
I'll say
exist
that.
with or
But they
without you, Jake.
exist.
They're already
There's
out there.
conversations happening. Yeah. Like, I'm sorry that Utah and Atlanta keep talking about John Collins. So but I think that to me, Dallas, where Christian Wood did have some really good offensive success alongside Luka Doncic, like, you could add John Collins there where he can both be a pick and pop and a real lob threat for both Luka and Kyrie. I'm still bullish. I've seen defensive flashes of his where he's, the 5 out there, and he's like kind of seems like when trust has been put in this dude and he has an expectation to like be contributing and like do this, and he's like feeling empowered, it seems like the attention to detail and the effort level on defense has been there. So I'm curious to see how effective he could be on that side of the floor in a new spot. I hope for his sake, I really do, that it comes soon. But to bring us to a close, like, I do think at this juncture, Atlanta is going to have to be giving up something in terms of asset valuation to get off of him. Whether that's, with a draft pick or giving up some, I don't know exactly how that happens now without the draft board that was just in play to do that with. But that's what, I mean, teams that have talked to Atlanta said to me, in order to take him, we're going to need some incentivization or whatever the conjugation of incentive is.
I was on my list literally to say, are they going to have to attach something? And it sounds like yes, which is not a huge surprise. I mean, I'm
not saying a first round pick or a lottery protected first round pick, but like, I mean, the Warriors just put a first round pick out the door to get off of Jordan Poole. So the Kings just put in the 24th pick to get off for Rashawn Holmes.
Yeah, and part of the limitation, of course, is that the Hawks are out some picks. I mean, they have those picks going to San Antonio for Dejounte, all that stuff, so they can't like be. And the seconds that they set for Sadiq, like they can't like be willy-nilly on that stuff. But yeah, I've heard the same thing. But I was going to ask you that, and you answered it without even asking you. But it sounds like it's kind of still the same thing there. The other guy I want to make sure I ask you before I let you go, and I appreciate all the time, is Clint Capela. So his is really interesting because they have a Kongwu number 1, a guy they invested a lot in, and I think is ready to start in most situations. But also, I think you've said it, I've said it. Trae Young likes Clint Capela. And Clint Capela is still good, and there's a lot of interesting. Like, okay, so
he was an animal against the Heat. I'm trying to find.
He played great in
that Heat game. He was unbelievable.
He was great. I mean, but okay, I'll ask it this way: is there a chance, or even a good chance, that they're still doing the Capela and Okongwu dance going into next season? Because this is year 4. I made this. I'm not reporting anything here, but if you're a Kongwu or if you're a Kongwu's agent, I think you probably want to start at some point in your career.
Yeah.
Are they going to do this again? And is there a chance that they bring them both back and run into the season?
I think so. In the last conversation I had with the highest ranking member of the Hawks that I can get in touch with, that person said to me that we got 2 great centers, and that's something that we view as a strength of ours, whether, for trade purposes or as, members of our rotation. So, and also, like, injuries happen over the course of an 82 game series. It is a very nice luxury to have. Another high on Jalen Johnson too. I mean, he was awesome last year. Like, I'm not scouring tape as much as, the Michael Pinas and the Dan Devines of the world that are doing it at like a national level. I'm kind of just like watching games to check in and see things that pop and look at dynamics on the bench and just kind of observe certain things and rotations and who's seeming to be making strides here and there. Like, I do remember DeAndre's second season, seeing him become more of a playmaker and being like, oh, this is a little interesting. Like, he's a little bit more than Rui Hachimura, you know what I mean? And
also Philly. I just realized this. Philadelphia's own DeAndre Hunter. I'm sure you have a little bit of extra attention
for sure. But Jalen Johnson, I'll just say to wrap this up, was one of my like, ooh, look at that guys of Leap S, because he definitely showed some frisky, in transition, playmaking, shooting stuff that when you're that big and that athletic is an intriguing. I'm sure, like for whatever Obi Toppin is for the Knicks, even though he was the 7th pick or 8th pick and had a lot higher expectations, I'm sure there's some type of that relationship with Jalen Johnson and Hawks fans, right?
Oh yeah, the Hawks fans are. They think the comparison I always get. You'll appreciate this. Again, going back to Philly, I got a lot of the Ben Simmons, but better kind of comparison. I was like, this is the 1 overall pick, guys. People were unironically comparing him to LeBron.
Is he a 2-time All-Star, Ben Simmons? 3-time All-Star? Definitely multi-time All-Star.
Something like that. But no,
Yeah.
Yes, Jalen Johnson has a lot of hype locally, as is AJ Griffin. And I mean, I think okay. I'll ask this too. Is part of the reason, because we talked about cost cutting earlier, is part of the reason they want to move 1 or 2 of these more high price guys to clear some more playing time for the likes of AJ Griffin and Jalen Johnson? Is that part of the like what you've heard, or is it just more roster balance and that kind of thing?
I haven't heard it, but I'm sure. I mean, roster balance also means that, right? So yeah, I mean, the one thing that is certain is that Atlanta has looked up and down and left and right at how to tweak this roster. So at times trying to figure out exactly what the goal is has been challenging, because I think a lot of the things they've been trying to do are a little counterintuitive. I'm not saying that they're screwing up in that sense. I just think we're very early in the off season. So the draft was just the first opportunity to make some things happen here. I mean, Portland is in a very different situation, but the same logic applies. Like, they still have a long stretch of the offseason to try to remake this roster into a better contending situation around Damian Lillard. Atlanta's got between now and the start of training camp to have a roster that has 90% minimum of the salary cap. Not saying that's the goal, but at least that's everyone's new thing. Just like every team has to do that. And then they're trying to figure out just how to reshape things here to best maximize this team's chances of competing, now and into the future around Trae Young, with Quinn Snyder as their full-time head coach after coming in like the 4th semester and getting his feet wet. So yeah.
I mean, the way, and you can tell me I'm crazy or not answer at all. The only hot take I've given, it's not hot at all, is that I think that they're not going to run it back with their top 10 guys they have under contract. I think at least one of them is going to be traded. That's the only thing I've ever said.
Yeah, I mean, some of a 10-man rotation being swap out, that's like a 10% chance. I'll say going out on a limb on a 10% chance is not anything too crazy.
Yeah, it just feels like, given all the dynamics in play, like what you said, they talked about so many guys. They have I'm not saying they have to cut salary, but money is a thought process. It's part of the calculus, all that stuff. So they're in an interesting spot. And also coming off back-to-back play-in appearances does not make anybody happy, especially ownership and leadership. Like, nobody wants that. So when you're paying a lot of money. So anyway, well, Jake, thanks for all the time, man. I appreciate it.
Thank you, man.
Again, I should say again, the day after the draft, I didn't sleep at all either. You didn't sleep at all. It is what it is. We're both on fumes, I'm sure. Not that you need to be plugged on my show, but anything you want to plug on this particular podcast?
Man, we're every show is a platform to new people who have never heard you talk before. So if you want to hear me talk more, I'm on the No Cap Room podcast on our Ball Don't Lie podcast feed at Yahoo Sports. My book Built to Lose is still out there. There's some Hawks almost drafting Giannis Antetokounmpo details in there. We got more free agency and trade stuff coming on the website the next couple of weeks. I mean, I'm praying to God that it's all done by July 12th, my flight out of Vegas, but I'm worried that we might have a Donovan Mitchell late summer trade scenario thing, just like last year. Not saying it'll be Donovan Mitchell, but something, of the effect.
In the middle of vacation for you. I will also see you. I will see you in Las Vegas, I'm sure. You work a lot harder than I do out there, man. But I will see you at some point.
I'll tell you, a lot of what I do is just hang out and make dumb jokes in Vegas. So,
well, that's where we met the first time long ago. I think we're not even 21 years old yet when we met. I'm fairly sure that was the case. My
first summer league, I was 20. Yeah,
there you go.
First Vegas summer league,
a long time ago. All right, Jake, thanks for doing this, man. I do appreciate it. As for everybody else, subscribe to this podcast, read all of Jake's work, and I'm sure there's going to be a lot of it. And we'll see you all next time.